Good afternoon, welcome. I'm Emily Tordy. I'm an agroforester at Appalachian Sustainable Development. Steve Gabriel's here today helping out with the hosting, and you'll be hearing quite a lot more from him shortly. And I just want to nod to the fact that this programming is supported by the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation, and they've just been really excellent and long-leashed funders who've let us have a lot of creative control over this, and we really appreciate that. So thanks to EMEF. We will be hearing shortly from Sophia Hampton about multi-generational land stewardship. And before we do that, just where we're headed. Right now, we're having our little welcome moment. We're going to just talk about Zoom webinars and controls, introduce a little bit of what ASD does, and get into the guest intros and presentations. The Q&A has two parts. First is sort of like pre-collected questions, and then there's the longer format live Q&A towards the second half of that section. So the meat and potatoes of today is going to be in Q&A. Just a reminder that we are recording. This is going to get uploaded to YouTube. And then if you need closed captioning, there is a button on the bottom, a little CC, and that's really useful even if you just are in a loud room or somewhere where you just want to be in a little quieter mode. Another reminder that the chat function today really is just for, introductions, sharing links, dropping comments, etc. But if you actually have a question that you want the panelists to answer, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A so we can collect them all in one place. All right, just a little bit quickly about ASD. Our mission is to building a thriving regional food and ag system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. We work in a pretty wide range, and we've been around since '95, so we are having our 30th anniversary this year, our 30th birthday, which is pretty exciting. And our work is in 5 key areas. We have workforce development, agriculture education, food access, economic development, and resources conservation. And that 5th bullet point, resources conservation, is really like sort of where agroforestry falls. So we have a really strong agroforestry program, but we're also a very like small corner of ASD in what we do. So if you'd like to find out more about that, please check out our website. There's lots of great information. The website in general is a really great resource, especially for agroforestry. That page is like an incredible springboard for anything you might want to search in that sphere. So agriculture has the power to transform Central Appalachia, and we really think it can help solve many of the food access, employment, and poverty issues in the region. Where we are, 1 in 8 families are food insecure. Farms and farmland acreages are on decline, and we have some of the highest rates nationally of poverty, hunger, and unemployment. So we are leading the way with a lot of different impacts. We have some highlighted here. Over $40 million in produce sold and distributed for regional farmers. Over 150,000 pounds of food grown by new gardeners that we've helped train up and helped give sort of technical assistance. 80 or more raised beds installed and managed at schools and clubs. And that actually needs to get updated because I think we just gave out 80 more just through our veterans program this spring. We've helped preserve over 5,000 acres of forest land and helped more than 300 new farm startups. And also, we've been able to donate more than 7 million pounds of local and regional food donated to area food pantries. So we have a food box program that's really strong and is like really radiates out pretty broadly from our main hub around Bristol. So that's one of our proudest points is the food box program. And again, the agroforestry page is just a great resource if you're looking to learn more about any different practices or resources that are out there. So we've got 2 more sessions after this one in the spring lineup. So please consider joining us for findings from farmer and nurseries listening sessions. Steve's going to talk more about those, but I'm really looking forward to today's talk in particular because I really think it's going to help set the stage for those and kind of address the elephant in the room of agroforestry, which is that we are doing this, multi-generational work, and we're only single generational individuals. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. I'm going to try Steve, are you able to, do you have poll control? Oh, wait, no, here I am. I got it. I got it. Um, and if you don't mind, viewers, listeners, please do the poll. It's actually really important for our metrics tracking, and it helps us in the grant world justify what we're doing and how well we're doing it. So if you have a minute, please go ahead and do that. I'm going to leave that up while I hand this over to Steve in just a moment. But I just want to say that we've got Steve Gabriel here today. Thank you so much, Steve, and Jonathan McCrae joining us for another session as guest hosts to kind of help out with Ask an Agroforester and to add some new voices and cover some new ground. So thanks so much for being here. Steve's going to talk a little bit about his work and the Farming with Trees Collective. And that's really about all you're going to hear from me today. So I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. And only have a few folks here that participated, but we've got quite a lot of, percentage wise, we've got a lot of annual or a lot of perennial tree crop folks. So that's pretty exciting. And actually, 5 out of 5 folks here said that they are managing land in a multi-generational context. So nice details to have. All right, Steve, I'm going to hand it to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here. I guess you'll push slides forward. I'll just let you know when. But yeah, I just want to appreciate folks for attending and folks watching this later, and excited for this conversation and how it fits into some of the broader work we've been trying to put our energy into. So we loosely have this group called Farming with Trees, and so farmingwithtrees.org is the website. This really arose out of a couple collaborations. There's a lovely set of videos on there that are case studies of silvopasture farms in the Northeast. So that was a sort of a collective project between multiple groups. And then more recently, our farm LLC is stewarding a SARE grant, which I don't recommend in the future, by the way. It's really awkward to run a grant through a for-profit business, but here we are, and we've been able to do some really exciting stuff. So we've been out in the field talking to a lot of folks, and we're excited to share that out, which is really what the next 2 sessions are about, is sharing the voices of farmers and farm nurseries in the agroforestry space. So please tune in for those if you're interested in hearing what we learned from those conversations. We wanted to bring Sophia in and have this conversation because it really fits well with what we're primarily trying to do, which is listen first before implementing strategies, actions. The grant started from the premise that us humans have been like pretty bad at large scale tree planting, like historically around the world. Large scale tree planting initiatives have often done very poorly. And we really wanted to ask the question of why that was and how we could do things differently. And for us, that really brought us to a point of saying, okay, well, if we really want to understand this, we need something more participatory, something more transparent, something more that's arising from local needs that the land stewards themselves are expressing. So a really common reason that tree plantings fail when you look at some of the research on that is because often the programs are imposed from sort of a top-down, strategy. Not surprisingly, but so we really wanted to start from the opposite end, and it took a lot of time and energy, but it was a really wonderful thing to participate in. I really enjoyed it. So excited to share that out. Thanks to Northeast SARE, we're able to do this work. So we really appreciate their continued support of good agricultural work. You can go to the next slide. So Farming with Trees, our project activities, we're just getting through the listening sessions and dialogue. We've decided to focus our efforts with 2 groups of farmers that happen to be in New York State, one in the Catskills region and one more in northern New York, where we'll be digging in deeper and helping with skill building, helping with filling in gaps around knowledge and demonstrating some tree planting and just helping skill those folks up and also provide plant material for current and future plantings. So that planning, that education, that's sort of in the phase we're in now. And we have some funding to actually support those things, and we'll be looking for additional support to help these projects. And we're excited to share more of those details as the plans start to come out. But if you go to farmingwithtrees.org, like I said, there's a nice video series from a previous project. There's also the current project here, which provides a summary. And there's also some articles that myself and Jonathan McCrae wrote that you might find interesting. So check those out if you want to follow up there. And you can go to the next slide. And like I said, it's very awkward to run a grant through a for-profit entity for a lot of different reasons. And we really feel passionate about this work and that it needs to continue, that we need to start with addressing agroforestry from a much more interdisciplinary action. I worked for Cornell Extension for years, and the reverberation in the room was often that it's just a technical problem. If we just, teach people skills and knowledge, then they'll be good. And then also, secondly, if we just give them some funding, then they'll be good. But I think there's a deeper series of social questions here, of cultural questions, of deeper things to explore. And again, that's why we're excited to host Sophia's conversation or sort of research work in this realm to add to that, because it's certainly nuanced and complex. So we hope to start to tease some of those points out today, and then carry that conversation into our future programs. So Mycena Agroforestry Initiative is actually a new nonprofit that we're incorporated in New York. We are patiently waiting for the federal government to hopefully grant us federal status. Who knows if that'll be on the normal timeline or some other timeline, but we look forward to organizing in the future under that entity and doing this kind of socially focused work with agroforestry and trees. So that's a little about us. And yeah, so I'm excited to hand the mic over, and you can check out Sophia's bio here. I think really she first came around doing some of this research and was interviewing farms in our region of Central New York. And I was just really struck and compelled by both our conversations and also by her ability to synthesize and sort of, I think, listen well and reflect back what she was hearing from different farmers and land stewards. And again, such an important part of the process to take that time to do that. And I think, yeah, fundamentally at the end of the day, as we've alluded to, if we don't start to dig into these deeper questions of what long-term land stewardship looks like, tree planting is certainly going to be, less meaningful, if not meaningless. So, yeah, I'm excited to hand it over to Sophia, and I'll let you take it from here. And then we have lots of time for dialogue and questions. And it's great to hear there's folks in the room with experience. We can draw upon that as well.
Hi all, thanks Steve. Yeah, Emily and everyone for being here. I will share my screen now. Um, can everyone see that? Great.
Yep.
So I'm finishing up a dual degree, a master's in environmental science and a law degree with Vermont and Yale. And prior to that, I was farming in the Hudson Valley area. Started in vegetables, moved to livestock, and then was doing quite a bit of agroforestry work before thinking that these land access issues that young farmers in the region were facing needed some more critical engagement. And so that's part of why I went to grad school. But I was also really compelled with what agroforestry offers the region. And so I've been thinking about those two issues together. And so I'm going to share a little bit from my thesis research. I'm adapting this presentation from one that I gave to a group of people who didn't know what agroforestry was. So um, that's why I assume everyone here knows what it is. You don't need me to read out the USDA definition. But importantly, the USDA definition is really technical. It's about incorporating trees on farms, trees and shrubs on farms. And I think the presentation I'm going to take you through today is really broadening the scope of what we think about when we think about agroforestry. It really is more than adding trees to farms and will require shifting some of the norms and assumptions that go with agriculture. And so Noah Simon is here from Breadtree Farms. I think Noah used my link for the webinar. So, oh no, you changed the name. Okay, great. So now it says Noah. So Noah's one of the partners at Breadtree Farms, one of the largest agroforestry farms in, I think, the Northeast. And so they're thinking about this issue of multi-generational stewardship in really creative ways. And so going to have Noah speak to that in there as well. So yeah, I think we'll get started here uh, with this premise that agroforestry means more than trees. If we're thinking about what an agroforestry transition is in the United States, we're shifting away from these kind of conventional agricultural systems, which are thinking about annual timelines. You're planting things every year. Things that have lifespans that are under a year, 4 months, and then simplifying those operations into single function or maybe one or two crops at a time. And agroforestry really implies the opposite. We're thinking about multi-generational crops, crops that may not even start bearing for 10 or 20 years, and then really could be in the ground with care for, maybe hundreds of years. And then on top of that, it's about complexity and multifunctionality, combining, integrating crops together. So, and that's where you're going to see the most benefits is through the interactions of a number of different crops. And that's so multifunctionality in terms of just multiple benefits that you're getting. You're getting food, and then as well as ecosystem services, as well as livelihood, quality of life increases, but also multifunctional in terms of many different things coming together. And in order to do this transition, we need secure land access for people who want to be doing agroforestry practices. And that is a bit of a challenge. I also don't think it's news to anyone in this space that land access is a huge barrier for most people, but particularly farmers who are interested in agroforestry, which tends to be younger people who can, see themselves tending to these trees for a while. And by younger, I just mean, under the average age of the farmland owner, which is 65. And women, queer, and BIPOC farmers tend to be the ones in the research that are most interested in agroforestry. And these farmers in particular, this new generation of farmers face really extreme barriers to secure long-term land access. The case in point here is that those who have secure long-term land access are farmland owners, and that group is 98% white, mostly male, and over 65. And it's not that those people, are necessarily anti-agroforestry. There's plenty of people who are interested in it, but oftentimes those farm owners are locked into debt cycles and farming systems that are really inhospitable to an agroforestry transition. And it's not even so, and assets are tied up in such a way that, transitioning or bringing people on towards an agroforestry transition might be more complicated than just wanting to do it. And so I'm going to zoom us out a little bit because when we're talking about land access, I think we need to be talking about property in the US. And I am in law school, and that is one of the areas that I focused a lot on. And so for thinking about property, I think it's more helpful to think about property as a system of relations, right? It's less the idea that you own something is really less relevant than your ability to mediate other people's access to that thing. And so from this, definition and understanding of property, there's many different property systems in the world and throughout time. When colonization happened, and especially when Europeans arrived on the east coast of what is now the United States, it brought there was a 300-year transition from indigenous property systems to what we now know as property, which is based on this idea of land as a commodity. Its value is based on its value is based on a speculative idea of what you can sell it for in the future. And sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm seeing things in the chat. Okay, just make sure that people can. Yeah. All right, great. And
yeah,
so,
you're good.
yeah,
You can ignore the chat.
Okay, let me know if anything comes up. And so it's based on this idea that you're gonna sell it in the future. And the commodity system really works against inclusive and secure land access. Over time, since this system has been in place, we've had increasing amounts of farmland concentration, so less and less farmland owners owning more and more. The fact that land is a commodity locks it into these debt cycles that I mentioned, as well as this kind of new movement of farmland financialization with investors who are tying farmland to their balance sheets and investor sheets. Along with the concentration, we have this prevalence of insecure tenure for farmers because they're forced to lease the land from existing owners. 40% of farmland is leased. Typically, those lease terms are on a year-to-year basis. Of course, that works against anyone who is thinking about integrating long-term crops like agroforestry. And just generally speaking, farmland futures have been really divorced from local needs because of this concentration, financialization, and debt. So the future of farmland is based on, commodity relations and whether or not someone can even afford to think about staying on their land. And this is really leading to farmers being forced to sell their land to the highest bidder to just, ensure their survival. So that's the broad strokes of how property is really this larger issue that is working against what an agroforestry transition is kind of seeking, which is really inclusive, adding more people to farmland and making sure those people can stay on there for the future, and then successive generations will have something to work off of. Oh, and the other big thing here is, rural depopulation. So less people on the thing, which doesn't bode well for the kind of labor needs that these agroforestry systems need. So I asked this question for my research, just how are farmers addressing the land access and labor needs associated with agroforestry transitions in the Northeast? And I did participatory methods. Like Steve said, it was a lot of listening, a lot of interviews, a lot of just seeing what people are doing in order to participate in agroforestry, especially those who would face barriers to land access otherwise. And I did a lot of driving around the Northeast. I went and was specifically seeking out these agroforestry sites or sites that were thinking about agroforestry with these creative land access arrangements. And what I saw a lot of was this idea of multi-party agroforestry. This is a term that came up in the literature, that academic literature in 2019, to really discuss what happens when people who don't own land are practicing agroforestry or are practicing agroforestry on land they don't own. And what comes out of that is these really interesting long-term partnerships. And because of the way that agroforestry allows for layering of different enterprises, as soon as you introduce trees, it adds this whole other dimension to what a farmscape can be. You're not just working on a horizontal plane, you're working on many different planes. You have your tree layer, you could have your shrub layer, your livestock layer, depending on how you're designing that system. And so, and because of these crops being so long term, the partnerships are thinking about 30-year or 100-year long terms together. I think Noah described these arrangements as marriages. And, they're just, maybe that's an accurate term. They actually might last longer than most marriages. But anyway, I thought it might be helpful to look at what a multi-party agroforestry arrangement might look like. So this is one of the silvopasture systems I visited this summer. And we have 4 kind of distinct entities operating this landscape. We have one party that owns the land and the trees. This is a cider orchard. And then we have another party that manages and owns the sheep and the chickens that graze through the orchard, another party who has bees and produces honey, but also, of course, contributes to pollination and that sort of thing. And then somebody else is growing annual vegetables in the kind of bottom ends of this arrangement. And so all four of these entities are distinct, autonomous, but working together to tend this landscape over the long term. And when I interviewed Rachel, who is one of the sheep herders and manages that enterprise, she said, this system works because the sheep and animals are 1/5 of what's happening here, and that's what we're responsible for. So we can see how these multi-party arrangements are really, really key for the success of these agroforestry systems in all of their kind of multifunctional complexity, and also setting the stage for longer term management that can just kind of increase in complexity and multifunctionality. So being in law school, I'm really interested in how these multi-party arrangements work and what makes them successful. And I saw kind of four buckets of structures that allow that are powering multi-party agroforestry in the Northeast. And those buckets were shared equity structures, creative leasing arrangements, land de-commodification, and municipal and state partnerships. And Breadtree is just, I think really a great example of what how agroforestry is transforming farms, and they're engaged in these shared equity structures as well as these creative leasing arrangements. So Noah is one of the partners there, and I'm going to have him talk about these first two structures.
You want me to start talking?
Yeah, are you able to?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Hey everybody, thanks for having me. So I guess Sophia, when you're talking about shared equity structures, you're talking about is your definition encompassing like shared equity in farm organizations and also potentially shared equity in land itself or like other.
Yes, sorry. I should have put that. I should have introduced that. Shared equity is a really broad term to describe um, this idea that the people who are doing the labor or involved and are being rewarded in some way. So that could be a worker-owned cooperative, that could be an employee ownership plan, that could be shared tenure or shared ownership of the land. But it's just counting this idea that the only person who has equity in a farm is the single owner.
Thank you. That helps me. Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to the way that we're thinking about these questions. I think generally speaking, we're trying to just be as creative as we can in recognition of the central importance of partnership in as a means to long-term stewardship. So let me think. We're a farm and food company, and one way that we can uh, create shared equity in the land that we own and the projects that we're building is through simple kind of like shared equity, like cooperative corporate structures, meaning like anything on a spectrum from profits interests for non-owner employees all the way up to like full member owned cooperativization. And I don't know, like that's kind of, I started a lot more uh ideologically purist, I would say, and like a lot more idealistic like 5 years ago. And I've over time, I think, gotten to a much more like grounded and pragmatic understanding of some of these tools. But basically, I think in my personal ideal, I'd like to be working towards a future where every member of our team is, a cooperative member owner of our companies. And I think that like is an ideal outcome if people want to, right? Like when people talk about this stuff in theory, it's very easy to forget, myself included in the past, it's very easy to forget that like different people actually want very different levels of responsibility and uh like truly cooperative governance and truly cooperative ownership mandates a level of responsibility that everyone actually isn't interested in holding. So I think a lot of the way that we've been doing this is like through a more emergent approach to uh, designing our organization, where basically like the relationships emerge from the people and their particular aptitudes and needs and interests. And that has manifested in a couple of different ways. Like one interesting way is that members of our team who are not currently owners have their own enterprises that are getting layered into our the landscapes that we manage. So members of our team are like managing, growing, and getting to be pretty big honey operations that like in some cases they capitalized and are occurring on land that the company owns. In some cases, the company might be like a very friendly lender to help them get those things off the ground. It's possible that in the future the company might uh, kind of like trade them equity for those enterprises. So it's like it's a more ecological approach. I think about it as like an ecological approach where people can find their place in a system of relationships, and we don't have preconceptions about like what the limits are of what the relationships can be. We just ask questions. So I don't know. Is that a helpful answer, Sophia?
No, I think that's helpful. I think I could have maybe done a better job introducing Breadtree also in the fact that, yeah, you're a team of six. You have
Eight.
all of you are,
Team
I
of
think,
eight now.
eight now. I think at least when you were a team of six, all of you were first generation farmers. All of
Yeah.
you were facing wouldn't have been able to do this on your own in terms of accessing farmland. And now you have a company that is at least gives salary and at least housing to all of the people who need it. And that is, at least my experience in farming, almost unheard of in certain ways because I like being all the farm jobs that were available to me, and my experience was hourly. I couldn't afford housing. And the idea that I could go from that to having my own enterprise uh, seemed possible. And so what Breadtree has done is think about, at least the way I've interpreted it from my interviews with Breadtree, is create a space where people have the um, like security and safety to start thinking very differently about their future and their commitment to the landscape. I think Sam, who's one of the employees, said he doesn't, at least when I spoke to him last time, didn't actually have equity yet, but he's like, my security and relationship to this company is so strong. I feel like I can talk as if I do and plan as if I do, which is just such a different dynamic for a young farmer um, to be working in.
Yeah. And I think actually, thank you for saying that. I think it points out like what has been, what has emerged to me as a really important part of like designing and stewarding these kinds of living human systems is like uh, Sam actually has to start thinking and living and acting as a partner in order to be a partner, right? Like it's not possible to like become, obviously it's like legal structures and financial structures are just like are somewhat feeble attempts to codify like the truth of relationships that exist in the world. And the truth is that like Sophia said, it's like trying to work with other people to steward landscapes and to steward the organizations that steward those landscapes over the course of many decades, and ultimately, like in a very ideal world, over the course of centuries. uh it, it requires that people invest themselves. I don't mean financially necessarily, but that they invest themselves, like personally and spiritually and emotionally and in their life, to building something as if they're going to be there forever, or at least they're going to be there for a long time. And maybe not forever. It's like there's a succession aspect of this too, but like, uh, yeah, it's not like, starting an advertising business or something. It's like you have to, I guess the point of this quote that Sophia's put here is like, I think the way you get to the best stewardship is by making sure that it is by creating conditions where people care about what happens on the long term, right? That's like how we create a different set of outcomes than the outcomes that we see all around us. So there's a lot to that, but I think that's the thrust of it. The other big area where we're working, I think, on in this domain is like actually land access. And um, you know, there's like abundant opportunities for cooperative land access within agroforestry systems that are like economically solvent, because basically like our incentive is to be here forever, right? Like all of our investment is or the bulk of our investment is at the beginning. So in terms of like the kind of uh, relationships of land access that we can create for other farmers, I think we can offer people a very different level of security, and we want to offer people a very different level of security in order to create different outcomes for them and different outcomes for the landscape, um, compared to somebody who's just like, you know, a, a, a member of a family who owns land and has debt and like no doesn't know what's going to happen. And obviously, like we face the same precarity as everyone else. I'm not saying that like I know what's going to happen or that we can't fail. Like we can definitely fail. We're trying to do something that's like extremely crazy. So we totally could fail. But in a world where we succeed, we will be here for a long time. So that I think enables some different relationships as well.
Yeah, thanks. And so another thing I'm pulling out from what you just said was just that, these legal structures are reflections of the relationships that have been cultivated through a lot of intention, care. And another thing, which is how Breadtree started, and what I've seen across a lot of the places I visited, were the fact that agroforestry is asking people to think really differently about what a lease is and what it means to give someone access to land that as a landowner you own, or that you don't may not own. And these leases, because they have such long terms, minimum 30 years up to 99 years, uh, really shift the power balance between the lessee and the landowner, and have to be based on a really strong partnership. Otherwise, yeah, what's on paper doesn't necessarily mean anything otherwise. And so I don't know, Noah, if you feel like you can talk about some of the ways that Breadtree started with these creative leasing arrangements and the lessons that Breadtree's learned from that.
So yeah, I guess I'm realizing it would probably be helpful to just give like a one paragraph summary of what we actually do. So uh, we're a farm and food company where we are managing about 800 acres in the Upper Hudson Valley between Albany, Troy area, and the Taconic Mountains in Southwest Vermont. Um, and we're working, um, as farmers on land that we own, some land that we lease, and uh, client owned land, people who hire us to design and build and care for farms on land that they own, which will then become um, contributing farms to the aggregation network and processing and food processing and sales function that we're building. So the farm that I'm on right now, where I was just planting before we got on, is a client's site where basically they came to us and were interested in basically like participating in the uh, supply system that we're building in the farm system that we're building. Um, so this farm is being planted with chestnuts, hickory as an oil crop, seaberry, and a white oak breeding orchard, which is going to be a first generation flower system. So I just want to give that context to say, like, when we started, we had no money, and uh, my partner Russell, in the year before I joined him, was thinking about how do I basically, he had been working as an ecological designer, and I think had grown frustrated with the limitations of his ability to influence good ecological outcomes as a consultant, basically. And he kind of got tired of it and said, like, okay, F this, I'm gonna do it myself and show people that it can be done. And then, was trying to figure out how to do that with no money. And the way he did that was he developed a revenue sharing lease where he basically was going to landowners and offering them, a percentage, in that case 10% of all future revenues from a chestnut orchard that he would establish on their land in exchange for a 30-year term. And he had to talk to a lot of people to find anyone who was interested in that. These kinds of approaches to farming, which remain quite, I think, like marginal and strange to a lot of people, at least in our region, were a lot more marginal and strange in 2019. And I think he talked to probably over 50 landowners in order to find somebody who saw the premise of a 30-year agreement as a testament to the depth of his commitment as a land steward, rather than as like something daunting or concerning or off-putting. So he ended up with a 30-year lease on a fifth generation dairy farm in northern Rensselaer County in Johnsonville, New York. That farm was in the process of transitioning from conventional dairy into a grass-based pastured livestock operation. And they saw the potential to add in like a very long-term tree-based system as a wonderful partnership opportunity. So that was how it started. And, he used like credit cards and friends and family and basically the partnership of Brad and Liz, whose farm that is, to create the place and the secure access for him to do that. Over the course of the growth of our project, we have sought to move away from leases because they are, even in the best cases, not as in the private property system that we currently inhabit, not nearly as secure as title. So, there's a lot more I could say about that, but I'm talking.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. The way that I think the creative leases, I usually talk about those first before the shared equity structures. I just think the shared equity structures are so interesting, but they're really like a stepping stone. They're the lowest hanging fruit, but they are this clear example of how agroforestry is just fundamentally shifting what conventional property dynamics agriculture operates off of, which tends to really privilege a landowner, which but then also can lock those landowners into, a challenging arrangements that prevent them from engaging in something like agroforestry. And then also younger farmers don't necessarily have the capital to engage in agroforestry. So trying to figure out ways that an agreement can address both of those things. Um, so yeah, I have the two other bucket. Just looking at the time, I have the two other buckets of things that I saw, which were people de-commodifying land, and then also people partnering with doing municipal and state partnerships, which um, I is less relevant to what Breadtree was doing. So I don't know, Steve, if it makes sense to maybe pause here, stop here. We can just talk about what has been said, or if just because I know Noah has to leave in 10 minutes. So
Yeah, I'm gonna just encourage anyone in the audience if they have a question specific for anything Noah mentioned or Breadtree, that'd be a good time now so we can pause maybe and then when Noah hops off, maybe you can finish with the other piece and then we'll open for more broader questions. And I'm not seeing anything specific to this right now, but maybe I'll give a minute for that. And I have a question that I can toss your way to Noah, and I'm just curious. I think it was really poignant what you said is sort of like, any of these structures are really like feeble attempts to really like codify what are really relationships. And so I'm just curious what it's looked like for you all to like treat each other and with intentionality and care and what's been really important. Like obviously there's lots of things that in general, but I'm curious if there's anything specific to like, and also we're planting trees for for the rest of our lives sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's coming to my mind is just like moving really slowly. In the sense like the marriage analogy holds here in the sense that like a lot of, it's like a lot of businesses like staff the roles that they need by like through this kind of like commodity system of like going like making some standard description and putting it out in the world and in flow the candidates, and it's like that's just not an option if you want to be doing something that takes decades, and you want to be ideally partnering with everyone who you're working with. You have to take a way more patient approach to actually building those relationships. And like, you know, everyone who's on our team now as a full-time, basically we think about like all of these like laddering different approaches to access. So like everyone who's, for a long time we were just planting like in a super grassroots way, just like I email everyone that I ever met and see if they want to come help us plant trees on the weekend. For years when we didn't have any money and like uh everyone who's on our team full time are basically the people who in the course of 200 people filtering through in a super informal grassroots kind of organic way, like some people really showed up and kept showing up and like were great and were deeply committed to it and cared a lot about it and were doing their own research and teaching each other things, and like those are the people who our team is made out of now. So they weren't people that like responded to a job listing. They were like the people who had already had the opportunity and risen to the opportunity of of investing themselves in the work to the extent that they obviously were able, as like our ultimately like hourly independent contractors, sort of like just buddies helping on the weekend. Um and we've tried to like continue to create those opportunities. So like right now, like this season, we're having a bunch of, it's kind of like everyone who's ever expressed interest in seeing what it's like to do this work more or work with us. We are doing like sort of short, like paid visiting planter uh, times where it's like people will come out for 2 days or 3 days or a week or something. We train them and they're working as a member of our team, while being paid and trained. And that gives them an opportunity to deepen their understanding of what's involved in doing this work and deepen relationships with our team as it currently stands. And my hope is that, from each generation of like people like that in that type of relationship, maybe some of those people emerge as like really serious about going to the next level and dedicating themselves to the work in a more long-term way. And there's lots of other kind of smaller examples of that, but it's that kind of thing. It's like finding opportunities to progress, for people to progress, find their own place in a very diverse system, both agriculturally and kind of human organizationally, and like remembering, like we're a lot less dependent on there were years where we were totally dependent on volunteers. Now we're good. Like we're a professional organization with a lot of expertise, like operational expertise. And I'm trying to continue to remind everybody, like we have to always be welcoming new people in, or we lose that. Like that was actually a lot of what made us good at what we do now is because had a lot of surface area for people to come in, and we have to keep that the way we have to continue to find ways to do that, even if obviously our circumstances change and our shape changes.
Yeah, wait, I just want to say to highlight one thing here, which is just like the thing about agroforestry is in theory, like the limit does not exist for how many people you can include on the landscape. Like there is like once you're thinking about land in the multidimensional way that agroforestry asks, like you can have somebody putting in just like a little enterprise here and there that layers in really nicely. And so you're really working from this place of abundance. And even if, Breadtree as a company isn't like able to come up with a salaried position, there are other ways of generating revenue there, which I just think is totally different also because farms are, always need labor, then can't make pencil out because of the kind of hourly way that they're thinking about this labor. And so and just the kind of baked in structure of who gets to, profit off of a farm or a piece of land. And this is just a radically more inclusive way to think about land management.
Yeah, it seems like it's a little bit of an analogy here. If we talk about like the marriage analogy that was brought up, it sounds like you do a lot of like speed dating with folks and like bring them in and like, hey, let's check each other out, see if there's a good fit. Let's not necessarily like just come in with our ideals and grand visions. Let's actually get dirty and see if we want to keep hanging out and working together, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
and also if we're gonna follow this analogy, it's like a very polyamorous approach to marriage, right? Like
sure.
it's not saying like I already have a good person, so I don't
Right.
need to talk to you. And it's not like in farming, a lot of this is like I already have a great tractor, so I just like uh improved efficiency, meaning made it so that people don't need to be involved. And like we use, we're like totally using mechanization in a lot of ways, and we're really happy to be doing it. And I just dug a hole for a hickory outside of the area that got spaded and reminded me of 5 years ago, and I don't want to go back. But there's a way of thinking about the role of mechanization in agriculture that actually is like explicitly about reducing the number of human beings who are working and who are involved. And I think we've sought to like find a balance between the efficiency that comes from mechanization and like the tremendous emergent value that comes from people being involved, which is not just about like the benefit for us. It's also like there are numerous farm projects that like have been born because people had the opportunity to come learn in the course of doing this. And if we had just gone like, yeah, we're just going to use a mechanical tree planter instead of having more people involved, they wouldn't have had that opportunity. So in our way of thinking, it's like we're not just trying to build our own thing, we're trying to help build industries. And that means if we want the industries to be cooperative and create equity and create skin in the game for lots of other people, that means helping lots of other people and not just like building a pyramid. So it's my spiel.
Yeah. Great. Appreciate you joining us today. I know you probably have to scoot, but more soon.
Yeah. Thank you guys. And yeah, thank you, Steve, for all the work that you've ever done. I don't know if we've ever met in person, but I've learned a lot from your writing, and you've been a great teacher to me and my friends. So I appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
Have fun, guys. See ya.
Thanks, Noah.
And
Great.
thanks, Noah.
All right.
Okay, let's scoot us through here. But do feel was really happy to have Noah to kind of give some color to some of the conversations and findings that I was seeing throughout my research. And the other piece that I don't know if I want to state explicitly is just that having title to land and being someone who owns land is secure for a single generation. And that is just fundamentally insecure in the long run because of the way debt cycles and financialization has trended towards concentration and farmland loss. And so the kind of premise with including more people on the landscape is you actually make and tying the outcomes of that farmland to local engagement is you actually kind of democratize the future of that landscape and tie it to local needs in a way that will probably be much more secure than if just one person is deciding the future there. So on that note, the third of four buckets that I saw this summer was this wave of people de-commodifying land, explicitly saying the way that land commodification functions against our goals and values is not something that we want to work with anymore. And so we're going to create a structure that removes the land from the speculative market and holds it in community trust. So one of the most popular ways of doing this is a community land trust. So I saw a bunch of community land trusts, but of course there are other ways of doing this. Indigenous property systems were explicitly decommodified. And so the land back projects that are happening these days, rematriation projects, as well as Black reparations projects, often result in land decommodification as well. And so this is just a quote from one of the community land trusts that I saw this summer. I think Catskills Agrarian Alliance, someone from there will be speaking next week maybe as well. And the process of decommodifying land just allows for the actualization of values around land as this thing we want to care for. So Francis said, I think for me and a lot of folks in the West Branch Commons, which is the name of their land trust, all of us really share this orientation to land as something that we have to be in community with and in partnership with. We learn from the land, we give to the land, and in return, it also provides an abundance for us. So that is a huge and exciting movement and something that has long traditions from the civil rights era of Black farmers working to take land off the speculative market, and as well as tying us back to what property was before colonization as well. So happy to talk more about that. That's probably the area that I get most excited about in this research, but I'll move us along. Municipal and state partnerships. Folks interested in agroforestry who don't have land access are often taking advantage of the fact that municipalities and states own a lot of land, and they are very secure landlords because they're not going anywhere. They're often the people who they're often not locked into any of these kind of pernicious debt cycles or that sort of thing, and so people are taking over vacant municipal land. See this a lot with urban food forests. In Vermont, Yellowbud Farm, I don't know if folks are familiar here, but they have done some really innovative collaborations with soil and water conservation districts. And then just generally regular people doing long-term leases with municipalities because what agroforestry offers is a public benefit. And so it's not, they may be able to generate revenue off of it, but also pitching it as something that supports water quality or clean air or food security, and getting grants and funding and municipal support to do that is a way to create land access for themselves and results in a really interesting partnership that includes, more actors and collaborators. So that is the kind of arc of my research. I think to sum it all up, all right, if we want to go from whatever the left-hand side, I don't know if that's the cornfield, to agroforestry, we need more first generation and diverse farmers who are interested in this work, and along with these collaborative multi-party arrangements that have secure land tenure associated. And then we do need some trees, of course, and I think the nursery sessions in the next couple weeks will highlight that aspect really nicely. So that's all I have to share. Some citations. People are interested in more of the work I was building off of. And then I had some really great funders for this research as well, and just ate a lot of really good fruit this summer. I at Steve's, I had so many currants, which were awesome. So I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to answer questions or whatever.
Awesome, thanks. I know it's hard to summarize a very dense topic and all these folks and all their stories, and it's been great to have that. And a couple of questions on that kind of overarching theme. So one attendee's asking, when you're talking about people who are interested in agroforestry and agroecological practices and who they tend to be, just curious like where that information comes from, or maybe you can speak generally to the participants that you worked with and how you found them and what that looked like, just so we know who's influencing sort of the work here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a combination of sources, right? There's research that just looks at like quantitative research or surveys that are just like looking at who is interested or familiar with agroforestry and working towards that. And those tend to be the findings from that are like younger people and women are really interested in agroforestry more so than men and older farmers, which makes the gender one is a little more complicated, but the age one makes sense, right? Like if you're investing in something super long term, unless you have, a younger generation coming up behind you, the incentives may not be there. Then the racial breakdown and queer farmer breakdown, that's coming from the, just the National Young Farmers Coalition has done a lot of work around land access and barriers to land access, has done a lot of surveying, and there just is this kind of consistent trend that the folks who tend to be more interested in agroecological methods and agroforestry, it just seem to be queer farmers are really interested, women, Black and Indigenous farmers as well. As far as agroforestry goes, the agroforestry is and it constantly spoken about as a Western adaptation of Indigenous knowledge. And so there is the Indigenous Agroforestry Network, who has done a lot of work around seeing almost like unanimous interest among Indigenous groups around adopting agroforestry practices as revitalization of their cultural practices in certain ways. And of course, the issues there are really land access because Indigenous sovereignties are reduced to 2% of their existing land base. And face, huge bureaucratic challenges to being able to actualize their cultural practices on that land. And then finally, it's just the qualitative research that I've done, the breakdown of who my research participants were in these really interesting partnerships tended to pretty much was only first generation farmers who were younger and had this seeing the most interesting de-commodified partnerships coming from groups mainly Black and people of color who have these more intact connections to land as this relational ancestor, cultural practices that are about tending to land as more than just like this economic engine. So that is there's some that it's like really interdisciplinary takeaway that I had, but it's based on hard survey data as well as qualitative work as well.
Right. There's I guess comment / question. Just curious how if you investigated or thought about other examples that show up in I guess more the agricultural world, such as like communal farm structures in the 60s and 70s, seed cooperatives such as Baker Heirloom Seeds, Ajani Seeds, sort of other. I'm just curious if there's intersectionality with any other kind of thinking with this in the other realms of farming versus just agroforestry, or how you think that can also inform this conversation.
Yeah, so the caveat is obviously, multi-party arrangements are not unique to agroforestry in any way, shape, or form. There are long traditions of sharing land and resources and access. And in fact, there's some probably ecologies where agroforestry is just inappropriate, like the prairies in certain ways. And so finding where the the goal, like I think zooming out, agroforestry's goal is really, I think, multifunctional and multi-generational landscapes that are cared for over time. And so that could, include trees, if you're thinking about it in that theory, but really is just about ecologically precise, inclusive management. And and that can involve, we need seeds, we need nurseries, we need all of these things. The thing that was interesting to me about agroforestry is the way that in the Northeast, it does really present this kind of staging ground for these cooperative ideas because of the way you can layer in all of these different enterprises, and often is the way the land, and it's ecologically precise. With colonization, there was just huge amounts of deforestation. Most of the landscapes in the Northeast are the result, farmscapes are the result of deforestation. You can watch the land really want to return to forests. And so I'm based in the Northeast, and that's why I was interested in what agroforestry offers, but am super aware and inspired by the ways that other cooperative arrangements work and happen. Particularly, yeah, the community land trust movement has been a huge point of interest.
Is there key things you've noticed in strong relationships between different groups or people doing work together, like clear legal docs, leases, regular check-ins, neighbors, friends, like any patterns you saw across folks you were connecting with that seemed to be
Yeah,
important, maintaining good
that,
relationships?
that's a really good question, because the Noah talked about this, but it is the clearest pattern is that nothing works unless people trust each other. And so building trust, that can't just happen in, a couple meetings. I think one timeline that kept coming up was 2 years. You really need 2 years of consistent ramping up of investment and responsibility with each other to get to a place where you could really build something going forward. Um, I think also on the legal side of things, like uh, lawyers are always thinking about worst case scenario, and I don't necessarily know if that is a helpful orientation all the time, but what it is it's a future orientation. So it's like, what happens if this happens? And running through those pathways is helpful for kind of gut checking how much faith you have in that relationship. Like, are you willing to um, give something up in the future if it comes down to it? And I did. So that was a big thing. It's just like long time frames, and the way people build these relationships is just like slowly ramping up the intensity of the projects they're working with each other. So like maybe they'll just, bring some trees together, and then maybe they'll, start a little enterprise together, and then maybe they'll go in on land together. The other thing is the land decommodification piece for places that are existing for longer than a single generation seems to be really key.
I'm curious, you'd mentioned you're particularly excited about sort of decommodification, and I'm thinking about there's these four sort of different models, and I don't think we can say that, this is the best one because context matters, and there's a lot of ways even these could be combined depending on the situation. But I'm just curious in the context of agroforestry, or if there was one that seems to have the most promise right now in the current situation, or are people pursuing more than others, or is it pretty evenly distributed? Or do you just personally think that one of them is more exciting or critical at this moment?
Yeah. So I think if you asked me this question before January, I would have just been like, community land trusts are a great place to start. And the way that people usually go towards a community land trust is getting 501(c)(3) status, and then that nonprofit holds the land in trust on behalf of the community. Uh, I don't think 501(c)(3) status is necessarily the way to go right now because or is not necessarily the most secure option. Um, because I think you mentioned at the beginning, it's unclear. Uh, yeah, I think it's a messy area to be attached to federal oversight in this moment in time, especially when you're trying to do something around climate or environmental things. So there, you can start a community land trust without nonprofit status. I think the benefit it offers, though, is um, might be might be less compelling. So there are really interesting ways of build. You can write bylaws or corporate structures however you want. You can create deed restrictions and things like that that prevent the land from ever being sold without that structure. The just the really important thing is that the accountability for how the land stays off the market is baked in uh, fundamentally. Like it can't just be a group of people couldn't just vote down the line to take that away. Um, and there's this organization in California called the Sustainable Economies Law Center that has a lot of really important resources about how to take land off the market and that sort of thing. Uh, they have this really interesting structure called a permanent real estate cooperative. It's kind of a unique California structure, but and in an urban setting. But I am really interested in the ways that um, those pathways could be applied in an agricultural space. So in that regard, the land is held in a for like it's a for-profit entity. It's not a nonprofit, and that I think is the other thing we need to start thinking about is just like we can't uh, doing good shouldn't mean that we have to be beholden to grant funding. Um, Things should be able to generate revenue and support their communities. It's just we don't want that revenue going away and building structures that aren't in our interests. So how can the structure build power in the community itself is is the thing that I'm interested in. And I'm sorry it's not like a clear like I love this structure, but I think the questions to be asking are, yeah, how does it stay in what is the thing that's keeping it from being put back on the market? What is the thing that yeah, what is that thing and how can it continue to build power over time that rather than being a resource drain?
Is there a difference? I'm just curious if there's a difference between just incorporating it as a nonprofit on a state level and, and as an entity versus also because you can do that without pursuing federal status. And I don't know
Right.
if you see any just with your law experience, any experience of that versus, um, a more of an LLC or sort of a for-profit corporation, I guess would be the contrast in relationship to land tenure. Is there any?
Yeah, I think those are really interesting questions. I'm interested in learning more about. I do think those are the questions to be asking. Um I don't have a clear answer for it. Also, yeah, I do have to say, given that this is going on YouTube, that I'm not a lawyer and I haven't passed the bar yet, so I can't give it like things that people might interpret as legal advice, but would just encourage people to ask those questions.
Yeah. And it sounds like no matter what, back to sort of Noah's comment, we are codifying something that ultimately also can be changed if relationships aren't strong and intact. And so that it's always going to circle back to that being importance because you can have multiple partners in a corporation, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, and many good things or many dubious things can can result depending on people's motivations and intentions. So I think that still holds true. But just to underscore, it sounds like a really important point around land tenure is having something codified around um, not being able to easily put that land back into sort of a market economy, and that's really secure, and that would be a really important place for people to put focus energy, regardless of a structure, is really to think that through and work on that.
Yeah, and It's just understanding that like the root of so many of these issues comes down to the commodification of farmland as some, which is the thing that's fundamentally breaking people's connection to it. And then, but also, you know, the things that are being codified are limited to that because the future might bring changes and flexibility, and you do also need to bake in flexibility as well. Because I think a lot of conservation easements have faced this issue, which is like they're pretty immobile and inflexible, and the way that a lot of these landscapes were conserved was such the idea that people shouldn't be part of them, and now um, like needs like affordable housing and things like that, which could theoretically be incorporated in conserved landscapes in really wonderful ways, are facing huge barriers to being able to do that. So I do think there's a lesson from the conservation movement of like how rigidity at all levels can work against what people are trying to do.
So there's a question about are there more ways we can be sharing stories of innovative land access and agroforestry? And the webinar is a great example and case studies, but are there other resources you come across or other ways you could suggest folks to find, examples and learn from that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question because so I've been working with the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School, which is a great resource, especially for people in Vermont. But they have this farmland access legal toolkit that is super informative. And I'm hoping after I graduate that I'll be able to write up kind of these buckets and case studies that I've come across and do like an agroforestry specific section on that website that helps people, especially agroforestry technical assistance providers who are think more quickly about how they're setting up the land and property systems to then integrate trees in with. So the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit is a great resource for thinking about creative leasing and community land and cooperative access already. And you can just apply that to your own thinking, and then hopefully in the next months or so, there'll be something in which I'm writing up the kind of like 9 to 12 case studies that I have. And then there's also farming, Faith Gilbert's book about cooperative farming. That's really interesting. But yeah, there's stuff out there as well. But if I think of more, I'll try and send it somewhere.
Yeah, I guess on that note, one last thing to hear your thoughts on is sort of, I know from my experience with a lot of these projects that there's sort of they're often at the very early stages, right? And so the trajectory is sort of in a certain direction, but the future is definitely unknown, and it doesn't have that stability of something that's been around for a really long time. And so curious what you see as really if there's anything else we haven't talked about that are really like key factors that you think will lend to folks succeeding in the long term or being able to sustain versus kind of lose steam or lose all the things that can result in something not panning out.
Yeah. That was when I was looking at all of these projects and really cool projects. I was like, wow, only a couple of these have really been around for longer than 10 years. And so I visited one project that is like the early kind of like permaculture, like 30 years ago designed farm with, and that one is really struggling right now with next steps. And part of the reason they're struggling is because it's just two people, it's like a couple who farms that property, and they've kind of created the ideal diversified farm with that class family farm model, right? And so they're not economically viable just because that the amount of labor that type of system requires plus what they're able to profit off has made it so that that succession planning has been a huge issue. They're like, we can't give this farm to anyone. It's like we spend all of our time farming and don't make any money. And so I think that kind of lesson was really important for grounding this research in the fact that the way that these farms last longer than um, a generation is by baking in the community element from the beginning. So Boston Food Forest Coalition and some of these other community land trusts that have been around for a really long time are the result of these municipal partnerships that kind of just from the beginning create avenues and points of engagement for lots of people to be involved. And that is just a fundamentally stronger structure for the time being, rather than starting as an individual project, an individual passion project, and then trying to include people later. I think a lesson that I learned from Cooperation Jackson and Callie Okuno, who runs that's a community land trust Black cooperative movement in the Mississippi area, is just like responding to community need is more important than individual passion in terms of creating strong, sustainable organizations. Because if you're able to, that just ensures that that organization is held accountable to more than one person's like whims, and also kind of counters against an individual burning out or being caught in some sort of unexpected situation that means that the business has to go under or they have to sell it or something like that. So it's just from the beginning thinking cooperatively and collaboratively and in response to your local needs versus just like an individual isolated project.
All right. Well, one more really serious question is, what's an agroforestry food that you'd be really excited to get to feast on this coming season? Since we're in spring, if you could choose anything, land anywhere.
I'm obsessed with stone fruit. I just could eat stone fruit all day long. But that's the first thing that comes to mind because last year was such a good stone fruit season. But I don't know, that's the cool thing about agroforestry is it can change every week. There's something else coming through. That's exciting.
Yeah, totally.
Mhm.
We're in ramp and cold shiitake season here right now. So, and then it'll keep changing. Yeah, I love that. Great. Thank you so much for sharing and for helping get no one here so we could hear from one of the participants. That was really great. So, and thanks everybody for participating. We're excited to continue the conversations and reflect back what we hear from sort of this larger nascent group of folks out there and bring some of these topics forward about what seems to be some patterns and possible pathways for success. And certainly a theme that you'll hear again if you come to the other webinars is sort of people are all in this and figuring it out and very much on the early part of that ramp, but very passionate and committed to the process. So yeah, good folks all around.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sophia. And we hope to see you in the next couple sessions where we will carry this thread forward. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Wow.
Bye.